opportunistic mishmash of genres.
6 precisely targeted movie sub.
The characters feel interchangeable, and the plot trails off.
Genres. And Roger Corman has shown us that it can. Surely, being from another planet deserves a little such credit here.
Ultimately,
Alas,
it's a personal
opportunistic mishmash of genres. 6 precisely targeted movie sub. The characters
public
feel
presentation
interchangeable, and the plot trails
of
off. Genres. And Roger Corman has shown us that it can. Surely, being from another planet deserves a little such credit here. Ultimately, alas, opportunistic mishmash of genres. 6 precisely targeted movie sub. The characters feel interchangeable, and the plot trails off. Genres. And Roger Corman has shown us that it
Television executives and media mavens are getting ever more adroit in performing wondrous cross-marketing feats, great synergies involving many divergent, lucrative properties. In the past 2 years, we've had Pac Mania. The video game's runaway success has inspired a novelty rock album, sundry pillowcases, t-shirts, and pajama sets. Even a publicity arcade bout with the game featuring Scott Baio, part of the rollout for a new Happy Days spin-off called Joni Loves Chachi. Since it came out in 1980, Pac Man has proliferated wildly, multiplying in arcades, sandwich joints, and skating rinks until now you see it about as often as you see the VW Bug. Pac Man the icon looks like a food article. Creator Toru Iwatani had the inspiration for it while staring at a pan of pizza with one slice missing. But Pac-Man's purpose is not to be eaten, but to eat. This he does endlessly, gobbling up white dots the way the Roadrunner blows across the desert highway. He goes and goes until you slip up and run into a ghost, at which point he withers comically to a sliver and evaporates. Along with his American brother, Garfield the lasagna-devouring cat, Pac-Man captures the zeitgeist. Gluttony's all the rage. Last year's Economic Recovery Act promised a huge boon to taxpayers in the form of the biggest tax cuts since Calvin Coolidge. But it's left to the federal government to run up deficits to make up the difference. The new president also jacks up defense spending and pays for it the same way. The result is the biggest military expansion since World War II. The biggest peacetime expansion the West has ever seen. So far, the Pac-Man years are all about shoveling it all in, wolfing it all down. Pac-Man has unseated the champion blockbuster Space Invaders. Missile Command, though popular, isn't quite in the same league. In this simpler game, you scoot left and right behind a row of shelters, taking pot shots at legions of commie marauders who shuffle inexorably towards you in regimented identical columns. All the ordnance gradually wears these shelters down, and in Space Invaders' final act, they've usually been whittled entirely away. You skitter and fro, but naked to the onslaught, you succumb. The aliens don't have to touch you to kill you. Taking the row that you occupy is enough. Lose your territory and you lose yourself. With its marching inexhaustible enemies and its building tension as the aliens descend, the raspy pulse of their steady march accelerates. The spooky game typifies the meltdown of the post-Watergate years. If Taito had decided to affix a backstory to Space Invaders more detailed than the vague mumblings about interplanetary war that the company actually used, they could easily have taken the fall of Saigon as inspiration. The machine came out 3 years after the end of the Vietnam War in 1978, the same year as Invasion of the Body Snatchers, that great cinematic treatise on losing the last of your territory. But Pac-Man's completely different. There's no turf here except a tiny box that the ghosts use to regenerate, and so good guys and bad both inhabit the same place. A maze with no solution, only space-defying tunnels that let you dart from one side of the screen to another. Although Pac-Man and the ghosts run about inside the maze, the player can see the whole thing, and so it's impossible to get lost. In this way, Pac Man the game collapses global and local space, putting Pac Man the character both on what Thomas Pynchon calls street level and in the privileged position of the universal subject, once a vacant mouth and the eye of God. Pac Man must wonder where his knowledge of the maze comes from. He must imagine the fates are looking after him. Pac Man's programmers neglected to introduce randomness into the subroutines governing the ghosts, and so by memorizing complicated patterns you can beat the game. Cheat death by outfoxing the ghosts into perpetuity. Again, this is well in keeping with the you can have it all spirit of the Reagan years, and yet the mind boggles to consider the aching hours of trial and error that must have gone into uncovering those patterns. Ken Houston popularizes these patterns in this year's bestseller Mastering Pac Man, but he certainly didn't discover them. They've been passed around in game parlors, the identities of their initial discoverers largely forgotten, just as the discoverers of video game Easter eggs. Hidden messages, rooms, or other quirks programmers put into games as a kind of graffiti typically go uncredited. The networks of players who've come up with the patterns practiced and studied and memorized and wrote down and passed along a detailed rumor that became valuable, but they weren't the ones to profit. To arrive at the patterns, these players would first have had to realize that the ghosts always do the same thing, given the same input. They would then conclude that the game suggested certain fixed solution paths. The pattern makers would play the game, deliberately memorizing every move they made until they died. They would backtrack, revise their final game decision, and repeat the entire process. This must have been painstaking, like writing a play and memorizing each line as you wrote it.
And paying a quarter every few minutes for the privilege of rehearsing. Pac Man's creator Toru Iwatani wanted playing Pac Man to be like creating your own cartoon, and judging by the amount of work they're putting into it, the game's players do seem intent on melding with the game in some fundamental, existential way. 2. As the public goes on weaving through Pac Man's mazes, they also go on sprinting through Raiders of the Lost Ark's tombs. The movie's runaway success has spawned a host of imitators in the year since its release. The entertainment industry has grown since Gamera rose up in answer to Godzilla, though a certain eclecticism has come to the art of imitation. Thus, Run of the Mummy movie The Being from Another Planet, Episode 405, doesn't just sack Raiders for its university archaeology department. It also plumbs the recent spate of slashers like Halloween and Friday the 13th for their stalker POV shots and Animal House for its costume parties and fraternity conflicts. It's not enough to rip off one style of movie. It's smarter to hedge your bets and rip off at least 3.
Still Being from Another Planet isn't done, because it also boosts a contrivance from the hospital horror films Nixon provoked with his privatized, HMO-based healthcare system. The concerned archaeologists spend at least as much time as Doctors Wheeler and Bellows studying backlit X-rays and comparing findings. It's even an X-ray machine that sets the whole nightmare in motion in the first place, when a dizzy grad student turns it up too high and it stirs the film's monstrous mummy to life.
But no, we're still not done, because the mummy turns out to be an alien, and this gives us a chance to follow along with the archaeologists as they decipher extraterrestrial wiring diagrams alongside the sarcophagus's Egyptian hieroglyphs. This calls to mind in our particular journey, Hangar 18 and the, by now well-worn, story setup that has aliens first taking up residence on Earth by assimilating with the tribes of the ancient Nile. This theory seems to mainly come from intuitive observation. The pyramids are too great an engineering feat. No humans could have built them on their own. Even though he's terrorized the town and directly or indirectly led to several mutilations and deaths, the alien/mummy has his fans, and so in the finale, human and alien hands clasp in friendship in front of a glowing backlight. This last bit of thievery is particularly brisk, E.T. the extraterrestrial having only been out for 9 months. We're now at 6 precisely targeted movie subgenres Being from Another Planet has managed to borrow from. If derivative exploitation can transcend its typical soulless avarice to become an art form, and Roger Corman has shown us that it can, surely Being from Another Planet deserves a little such credit here. Alas, this opportunistic mishmash of genres fails to cohere. The characters feel interchangeable, and the plot trails off into a murk of scattering crystals, boiler rooms, and corrupt administrators. Hello, Jaws. Ultimately, it's a personal project that never quite comes across, and this is ironic, no? Public presentation constitutes the essence of the imitative act. You make an element from another film your own, explicitly to present your version publicly, and thereby make a buck or two. Indeed, it could be argued that derivative filmmaking in its creative aspect has no private component at all. You're repackaging something presented publicly and presenting it publicly again, your only creative input being to change just enough to avoid a lawsuit. Yet, Being from Another Planet feels personal, enough to make it inaccessible. Because the story elements aren't well connected enough to propel the action, the movie has a fragmented, dreamlike quality. One begins to suspect an unprocessed neurotic interest on the part of the filmmaker, or one begins to engage with such neurotic interests in one's own mind. For example, a grad student finds one of the alien crystals and refashions it into a gift, an overture for Susie, a fellow student, as a way of expressing his desire for her. She takes it with a shrug and ignores it thereafter. But in the third act, it catches the eye of Professor McCadden, the head archaeologist and true object of Susie's affections. Meanwhile, the unloved boy dies horribly soon after he gives his gift at the mummy alien's hands. Is there a formative story here of love unfulfilled, a hyperbolic expression of the pain suffered when an offering of desire is accepted merely out of hand? Or is it all just a writer's lazy oversight? The green goo that stains the mummy alien's wrappings is corrosive to the touch, functioning essentially the way lava does in the archetypal children's game. And speaking of children's games, the alien takes up home base in the university boiler room. We already know the boiler room is the repressed locus of industrialized cannibalism, as in Soylent Green, and organ trafficking, as in Coma. It's a little surprised to see it here as the locus of fleshly corruption. The green goo rule is violated in the boiler room more than once, and ultimately as portal to an alien dimension. Where the genre confluence makes the narrative feel disjointed, the subconscious resonances of all these various archetypes seemingly betray the writers to be a thoroughly deranged mind. Not that I'm one to judge. In fact, the film was simply written by committee. The writing byline is split 3 ways. This is getting to be the state of popular entertainment in the age of immersive simulations, Tron and Star Trek II. As cinematic creations become genre goulashes, cynically engineered to maximize profit, audiences become more and more confused and at the same time more spiritually charged. These films are high in emotional and psychic potency, low in coherence and substance. As Hollywood migrates from the Coppola strategy to the Spielberg doctrine, eschewing the highbrow for the mass market, its product adheres less and less to 3 or 5 act story structures, traditional film editing, and other by now well-established strategies for creating commercially viable entertainment. Instead, movie makers are creating works of extra-narrative montage. Movies don't tell a tale or offer audiences a particular emotional or intellectual experience so much as they're written, arranged, performed, and edited to borrow as effectively as possible from previous successful movies. What results when these profit-driven experiments and cynical pastiche are mistaken for proper films? Not long back, before blurring the line between trash and art, Pauline Kael suggested that one of cinema's central aims is to assuage loneliness, to offer relatable cave shadows. Kael's lonely filmgoer and the shade on the screen form a circuit, a secret sharing, rather like Podo and Kabingo's, Tia and Tony's, Luke and Leia's. As film devolves, it stops serving other purposes, such as the catharsis that comes from proper storytelling, and accomplishes instead only this. From among Lacan's three famous psychological orders, the imaginary, real, and symbolic, the movie screen would presumably constitute the first. The real is always too remote for mortals to perceive. Only the symbolic remains, then, to constitute Cale's alienated moviegoer. Such solitary movie patrons proliferate. In their ninth circle sulks taxi driver's sullen Travis Bickle, staring at dirty movies through his square fingers. But consider also from our current offering Susie's jilted suitor. Most of what he imagines about romance he's likely gleaned from the movies. More and more we're learning that almost all of us have. Before modern pop culture, his failure to connect would be thought of as tribal ostracism or evolutionary failure, which is to say it wouldn't be thought of at all. Silver screen romance, in underscoring the loneliness of its disconnected customers, preserves only that husk of Homer's satire that remains after the practice of tribal isolation has led these terminal singletons to the theater alone in the first place. Can this network of isolates be thought of as a symbolic system? Or do God's lonely men only exist as isolated phonemes, bearers of dull funk and hopelessness who slip into the cinema grindhouse, hoping to escape that feeling of being a displaced person a long way from home?
Leave this world behind. Oh yeah, leave this world behind. Oh yeah, leave this world behind.
Linus, did you see? Linus, I just saw the most beautiful girl in the world.